Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm Dr. Rachel Bussman, Director of the Selective Mutism Program and Senior Director of the Anxiety Disorder Center here at the Child Mind Institute.
Hi everyone, and I'm Elisa Goods, a Behavioral Technician in the Selective Mutism Program here at the Child Mind Institute. We're here today to talk about a really important topic that we get lots of questions about. This topic is how to do community exposures with your child. Exposures are really important when considering how to help your child with their brave talking and bravery in general.
Absolutely.
When we're talking about exposures, what we're really talking about is doing repeated practices that involve doing something hard and staying in that situation long enough to get through it without avoiding it. Remember, exposures need to be done repeatedly and in lots of different situations and contexts, and they should involve one thing that's just slightly harder than what your child can already do at this point.
Right. And so before we talk about your kids, we're going to use what you would do as an adult with a fear. So if an adult had a fear and avoids subways, which can happen, especially here in New York, and you haven't taken a subway for a really long time, it would probably be too hard to just get on a subway and ride it, especially if you hadn't ridden a subway for a long time. The person might actually make it to the door of the subway and then maybe say, no way, I'm out of here when the subway came. A much better and likely successful plan would be to decide, I really want to take subways. However, I haven't been going on them for a long time, so I'm going to go for a week, every day, with the intention of getting down the steps into the subway station and even wait on the platform to just feel what it's like, get used to that feeling, get through it. Probably won't be fun, but I can do it, and do that every day. And then make a plan maybe to take a train for just one stop for the next kind of step in the exposure plan. Build from there, exactly. So the goal of an exposure for a child working on bravery with speaking is similar, especially in the community, to do things that the child hasn't done before, but a lot of times and in sort of a stepwise way with a lot of support and reward along the way. So one of the questions that we get a lot, maybe the most, is where do I start? And it's a really great question and important for each parent or caregiver to know the answer, because it's really going to dictate how you go about setting an exposure plan. And it's really going to depend on where the child's at currently. So if your child already speaks to you when you're out at stores and in places like restaurants, that's actually great. Your next goal will be for them to keep doing that while praising them for being brave in these situations. And it might sound strange to actually think about doing that, but likely your child might not realize fully that they're speaking to you while others are around. So saying something like, I love that you're talking to me in this busy store, or thanks for chatting with me while we're waiting to pay for the groceries, actually lets the child know that you're aware that they're speaking in those settings. So it's a really helpful first step.
If your child has not yet spoken to you in a public place, that's okay. This is going to be where you start.
Right.
One way to start is to go somewhere where you can have some room and you can even stay a while. Something that we like to do a lot is go to a quiet bookstore, maybe a Starbucks cafe. And it's really important to have something in mind for you to bring something that's fun and engaging for you and your child to do together, like a game. Like we might bring something like a Mad Libs for you and your child to do together, or maybe a game of Uno. And remember, sometimes when you're in a new place for the first time, your child may begin at whispering, and that's okay. You want to remember to praise them and encourage more speech along the way. So this might be something like, thanks for telling me that you want to play Uno. Keep track of brave talking with check marks or stars on a page. But if you don't have an extra piece of paper with you, that's okay. This is a time where you can actually get creative.
Right.
Something we do sometimes is even just take out a tablet, take out a phone, start using emojis to keep track of all the bravery that you and your child are doing together, because you want this to be a fun and rewarding experience for your child, and let them know that you understand that they're doing something that's really tough.
That's hard.
Another helpful strategy that we like to do a lot is to play I Spy or do a search and find in a new environment. This is one that we sometimes do with Barnes & Noble. And this is something that can have your child become engaged in this new place. And this can kind of look like if you're walking along the street to get to the Barnes & Noble, you can let your child know anytime they spy a taxi to shout out taxi. Right. And remember, when they are verbal with you outside in the community, you want to keep praising them for doing this. Thanks for telling me that you spot a taxi. And remember to reinforce their bravery with a star or an emoji or a check.
Exactly. And it gives you something to do while you're moving from place to place without just saying, we're going to practice talking, which can feel a little daunting.
Exactly.
Another really common question we get is, how do I get my child to order in a restaurant or a cafe or a store? This is, again, a really common question, and it's really important to begin to do the exposure where your child's at. So if your child already talks to you at restaurants or busy places like a coffee shop or donut shop, that's great. You can begin having them practice continuing to do that and ordering to you in front of another person, which would really be the first step.
Yes.
So you might say to them, we're about to get a donut. Do you want a chocolate one, a vanilla one, or something else? And if your child answers you, even in a whisper, you would say, great telling me at the counter, or great telling me online, away from the counter. It's really important to remember that, like the Subway example we talked about, just having your child go up to the counter and say, I want a blueberry muffin would be really hard. So really the first step here would be to have your child consistently ordering in the presence of a new adult.
Exactly.
And again, that idea of wash, rinse, repeat, you want to do it a lot of times. So you want to make sure to praise effort. Great job working hard to tell me what you want online. And again, remember that if your child whispers, that's a step in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And also if your child whispers, you can use a strategy called reflection. So for example, if your child says, I want chocolate, you can say,
I want chocolate.
and now you've made it a little bit louder so that really the clerk would hear you say, oh, you want chocolate. And that you were able to say, you really great job practicing ordering.
And if your child is already doing this in presence of another adult, there are a few ways that we can actually bump up these exposures. So remember, exposure is something that you're doing repeatedly all the time. So you can ask a clerk ahead of time to say to your child, do you want chocolate, vanilla, or something else? And remember to wait for the reply from your child. Sometimes having a clerk ask this question ahead of time is enough to have your child already reply. And it's okay if they look towards you. This happens sometimes. If a new adult is asking your child a question, they might actually turn to you to say chocolate.
And that's absolutely fine.
And remember to praise. You want to continue praising. Another idea that you can do is actually to get closer and closer to the counter.
Right.
So this might happen when your child might not be quite ready to answer a new adult's question, but you want to enter a new space, like a cafe, for example, and you can ask them right as you enter, do you want chocolate, vanilla, or something else?
Right.
And you want to repeatedly have them answer your question as you get closer to the counter, because each incremental step is very important. And again, this is a time where you want to remember your powerful tools like reflecting. If they're in a whisper, if they say chocolate quietly, you could say you want chocolate, and to remember to keep your praise as well.
Another common question we get is, what do I do if my exposure doesn't go according to plan? And this is a really important question for us to answer because we always have a plan B in mind and a C and D.
Definitely.
It's really important to, as an adult, go into an exposure with your child knowing, I think this could go well, and if it doesn't go as planned, I know what to do. So the first thing you want to think about in the situation is, where was the place where I last felt successful and where my child was last talking? So maybe you go into a store and they walk into the store and they say, I want to get a cake pop. And you say, oh, great, telling me you want to get a cake pop. And your plan is to go closer to the counter, and you get to the counter, and all of a sudden the clerk starts asking lots of questions, or your child freezes. It's really helpful to remember that you don't have to order right at that moment. You can actually say, we actually need to think for a second. We'll come back. Let the person behind you go ahead, take a step. Exactly. You can regroup and say, that was a little harder than I thought. Let's practice.
Remind me, what did you want again?
A cake pop.
A cake pop. Thanks so much for telling me.
And then you might decide, let's go back online and sort of move up closer to the line, and maybe you'll end one step back from the line or one step back from the clerk. Or maybe you'll actually go back up to the clerk and say to your child one more time, what is it that you want? But the idea is that you can regroup in a lot of situations, and that's really helpful for a parent to remember.
Definitely.
Another thing that happens a lot is very well-intended neighbors or strangers or clerks asking a lot of questions, like
rapid fire
questions. What would you like? Do you want milk?
How old are you?
What were you for Halloween? So it's really also okay to say in that moment, wow, that's a lot of questions, or thanks for asking, we're still working on ordering, or we're working on answering questions. And then you can decide in that moment, what do I want to do? Do I want to take a step off the line, or do I want to ask the waiter to come back? Or is this just someone we met on the street as we were walking and it's enough to say, thanks for saying hi to us, we'll see you soon? The important idea is that you want to end on the highest note possible with your child in the best place for success. And that might mean, as an adult, being flexible about where your goal is and where you end.
Yeah. And you might be wondering, we're talking a lot about this idea of rewards. So what do we mean when we're talking about rewards? And we recommend having a prize identified before you even go out on your exposure. This way, you're constantly reinforcing all the brave work your child is doing with the clear goal in mind, and you're not scrambling to figure out what that prize is.
Right.
And this could be something as simple as a special game or activity that you and your child do together.
Right.
And we want to say that it's really important to do it right after your brave practice, because you really want your child to understand that you know that they're doing something difficult. And this could be also a small prize, like a cake pop from the shop that you were at, or maybe even picking out a bookstore or a small teddy bear from the bookstore that you were at.
Exactly.
And remember to keep track on a small piece of paper or on your phone with emojis that can be helpful and fun for your child, because you want them to understand that this is something that they're working on together with you.
Many people have asked, and I think it's a really good question, well, this stuff sounds really great, but for younger kids, what if my child's older? Like, I have an 8-year-old or I have a 10-year-old, and some of the language you're using sounds really babyish.
Too sing-songy.
Or it's a little babyish. And you're right, this is a great question. We find a couple of tips would be really helpful with an older child. First of all, we recommend being a lot more casual and less kind of sing-songy with praise. And you want to
meet them where they're at.
Exactly. So if your child who's older would handle a thumbs up or just
a nod
rather than thanks for telling me what you want, you should do that. Really, the idea is, as long as they know that they're working hard on their goals, the way you praise them is kind of less important. Additionally, giving some choices is really helpful. So today, we're going to go out and do some errands. Do you want to go to the pet store and we can kind of look at the dogs there? Or do you want to go to the bookstore? Giving your child a little more independence in making a choice can really help. Finally, I would say that we find that transparency helps a lot here. A lot of times we hear older kids saying, you're asking me so many questions and you know I don't like questions.
I know the answer.
I know the answer and you know the answer. It's really helpful to say, you know what, Elisa, I know you know where the milk is in the grocery store, or I know you like chocolate donuts. Remember, the reason we're doing this is really for speaking practice. And that, again, is why having goals and prizes identified is helpful. And unlike some younger kids, older kids can kind of hold in their mind what they're working towards. So maybe your child really wants to have a sleepover and you've identified that 10 or 15 brave checks would equal that. Well, you can keep that in your mind, or if your child happens to want to keep track of it themselves, you can.
And older children sometimes can work towards a larger goal. They might not need that prize right away.
Exactly. And I would also say with prizes, just a word about prizes, we've never seen in all the kids we've worked with a child getting addicted to prizes. It's not bribery. Bribery, we feel like, is something you do in desperation, whereas a prize is an incentive you're working towards. And if you kind of think back to our Subway example, an adult is able in their brain to think about the consequences of spending all the money on the Ubers and taking all the time trying to wait for a taxi. A kid isn't as able to think about the consequences of speaking and not speaking. So prizes and incentives are really key in helping to motivate a child. We hope that this answers some of the most common questions about community exposures. They can be done anywhere and anytime. Bring your patience, your skills, and your creativity. And don't forget to visit our website for more tips and information, and for information about our next Brave Buddies programs, which will be open in April and August for our multi-day program. Please visit us at childmind.org. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.